In this video, I want to talk about how the MAGA movement rots your soul and corrupts your understanding of your neighbor. I want to begin with this tweet I posted today. Anybody who claims that Jesus' call to love your neighbor applies only to people who have legal standing to live in the geographic region where they currently reside is a false teacher. Sorry if that's a mouthful. What I'm saying here is that if you believe that your neighbor does not include your neighbor who lacks status to live in the country, then you have a corrupt understanding of the teaching of Jesus. Predictably, I received people taking up exception to this from the MAGA movement. So here's what one individual said. Jesus didn't foresee 10 million illegals in 4 years. So this is from the standard school of, well, if Jesus knew what we're experiencing right now, he never would have said that. Seems to be the idea here. I want to focus, well, first of all, just reject that categorically. Jesus understood better than anybody the radicalness of what he was teaching, and he's not about to qualify, let alone reject his call for the love of neighbor just because there are several people in your neighborhood who do not have passports or birth certificates. Second thing, though, I want to highlight for this tweet is the way it dehumanizes with the use of the language of illegal, to use that word illegal not as an adjective, but as a noun to define people. So let's pause on that. I want to say some words about that, and then we'll come to the second tweet. I want to begin by making a claim, and the claim is that any particular stance toward another human being which encourages dehumanization and objectification of that human being is itself contrary to the teaching and life of Jesus Christ. Okay, I hope you agree with that. If you don't, you may leave this video dissatisfied, but you will have me saying to you that if you think that is inconsistent, that it's a problem to say you ought not to dehumanize, then I think you fundamentally misunderstood the life and teaching of Jesus. So now let's talk about dehumanization. Dehumanization is a process by which we objectify and remove personal characteristics from human beings, particularly targeted outgroups, in a manner that makes it easier to objectify them, to bring about potential harm to them, which shields us from our moral sense that we might otherwise experience of compassion and mercy toward them. Now, psychologists and philosophers have identified different types of dehumanization, and I want to quickly go through four of them and then focus on the fourth. Well, a first type is dehumanization through animalization, or treating people as animals, non-human creatures. For example, referring to human beings as a pestilence, referring to the Jews in World War II and the Nazis did as vermin, or referring to the Tutsis as Hutus did in the 1994 Rwanda genocide as cockroaches. The second type of dehumanization is that which comes through subhumanization. So treating them as less than fully human, referring to the targeted outgroup, for example, as savages or barbarians or primitives. So that's another very common type of dehumanization. So you have animalization, subhumanization, and third, you have demonization. That's probably the most extreme. And this is where you treat them as monsters, the embodiment of evil, demons, something like that. So those are the three types of dehumanization. There is a fourth type. It's, I think, in some ways, perhaps a subtler type, but it is still nefarious and it is still dehumanization. It's still contrary to what it is to be a disciple of Jesus, which is opposed, diametrically opposed to um, dehumanization. The fourth type is mechanization. This is where you dehumanize by treating the human being as a mechanistic object or robotic, or in the case that we're going to look at here, depersonalized through mere legal adjectival definition. So, come back to the term illegal. The term illegal means to be forbidden by law or statute. It's an adjective. When you treat illegal as a noun, you refer to a human being as an illegal. What you're doing now is defining the sum total of that human being through the referent in virtue of lacking legal status. That is a type of dehumanization through mechanization, finding them purely in terms of the absence of their legal status. So you look up illegal as a noun in a dictionary, as I just did this morning, for an example, and it says informal use, disparaging and offensive, meaning illegal alien. So illegal is a short form of illegal alien. So that is a type of dehumanization as well. And that's what that individual is doing in that tweet. And that is very common rhetoric among the MAGA right, is to define human beings as illegals, noun form, define them purely in terms of that status, a mechanistic form of dehumanization. And that's key because then it makes it easier talk about, let's say, rounding up men, women, children, the elderly, sending them to internment camps or to Guantanamo Bay, as Donald Trump is now beginning to do, by referring to them not as men, women, children, the elderly, residents of our communities, friends and neighbors that we've known and perhaps loved, people who worked in our fields, worked at our businesses, served us in restaurants, etc. No, just define them as illegals. That becomes the noun form, singular way that you refer to these people. You objectify them, you dehumanize them, and that is wrong. Let's turn now to the second tweet response. Here is the second response. So this individual begins by putting in quotation marks their summary, I guess, of my tweet. And their summary is Christian charity means nation states are immoral. Now, of course, that's not what I said. I never said anything like that. I do think that the MAGA movement is immoral, but the mere existence of a nation state is not immoral. No claim of that type was made. So that's just clearly a straw man. But then note what they do. They say this interesting argument, but I doubt Augustine would argue the state should let the vandals settle Africa. Two things here. The first thing is you should, if you're a Christian, your first lodestar, your baseline should always be Jesus Christ. And be very careful about people who want to deflect from appeal to Jesus Christ as a model, deflect from looking at his life and his teaching by instead going to somebody else, whether it be St. Augustine of Hippo, whether it be Thomas Aquinas, whether it be Martin Luther, whether it be a contemporary theologian or teacher or preacher today. The first person you go to is Jesus. The next thing, though, is the thing I want to focus on, and this is telling. They equate people who lack status living in the United States to the vandals who invaded North Africa, or presumably like to the Goths who invaded the Apennine Peninsula, what is today Italy, and other various quote unquote barbarian tribes who invaded the Roman Empire, and say that the people living in the United States today who lack status are equivalent to these alien invaders. This is the second type of corruption of the soul that you get from MAGA rhetoric that I want to address now. Again, this is a type of dehumanization where you are treating, in this case, you're treating them almost like subhuman enemy combatants. So these are people you're alleging through your rhetoric have invaded the country, and you now have to fight back this alien invasion. But these are not warriors. We're talking here about civilians, about men, women, children, the elderly, infants, peaceable, law-abiding civilians living in your communities, living in your neighborhoods, living alongside you, working alongside you, serving you in business establishments, and so on. Those are the people that we're talking about, not alien invaders. However, the rhetoric of referring to people who lack legal status to live in the country, referring to them as alien invaders, uh, is a very, I mean, it is definitional of Trumpian MAGA rhetoric. Back again, as I've said before, to June 2015 when Trump launched his movement by targeting Mexicans coming across the border and saying they are rapists, they are criminals, and some, I assume, are good people, he said. In 2018, his rhetoric shifted, or expanded, I should say, to encompass what he described as caravans of people coming across the borders. He has repeatedly conflated immigrant communities with Latin American gangs. He has repeatedly talked about this as an invasion. And this has been going on for years now. So I'll just point out one example of this. In 2019, The Atlantic published an article titled, Where Does Trump's Invasion Rhetoric Come From? And the short answer is where it comes from is a long history of xenophobic dehumanization of outgroups. One example that is provided in the Atlantic article from 2019 comes from the 19th century. Let me just quote from the article. Uh, the Chinese invasion, they are coming 900,000 strong. On August 27th, 1873, the readers of the San Francisco Chronicle were greeted with these words in a notice that demanded, What are you going to do about it? Nations of the earth, take warning. The idea that you would characterize immigrating populations as a negative alien invading force is a very old type of dehumanizing, othering, xenophobic rhetoric. You saw it in the 19th century, you've seen it in the 20th century, and it has been definitional for the Trumpian movement. So, to conclude, once again, when you are conditioned to your first response to my tweet about loving your neighbor as yourself, even if that neighbor does not have a birth certificate or a passport to live in the country in which you mutually reside, if your first response is to explain why you don't have to love them because they are an illegal or they are an alien invader, that itself is pure excellent evidence that your mind has been corrupted by the MAGA movement, and precisely to that degree, it has become an apostate and anti-Christian mind. Jesus called us to be conformed not to the patterns of this world, patterns of the MAGA movement that dehumanizes vulnerable people on the margins, but rather to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, which includes and is defined by the love of your neighbor as yourself, even your neighbor who lacks a birth certificate or a passport.